number 16, and there's a whole section that you can look at on emergency planning. If you get to watch this program more than once, or if you DVR it or make a videotape of it, you can also go to the homepage and look at section number 17. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, part of our best message for today. The other thing that we wanted to say is, and I'm sure that this will be part of the close of tonight's program, you need to get prepared. We're going to show you how to do that. That'll be the next part of this program. But you also need to contact elected officials and let them know that you want them to protect you. Speak out on your behalf to close Limerick. We've said shut it down before it melts down. And you also want to join our petition. Growing numbers of people have signed the ACE petition. You can do that by going to the ACE website. And it's time to speak out. It's time for people to have their voice join up with a whole lot of other people. Those numbers have grown tremendously, Nick.
I know we've mentioned this before. Before we take a break, tell people how a meltdown actually could be triggered. Because people say, well, actually, what could happen? What could cause a meltdown here in our area?
That's a really good point, because every once in a while we get somebody who's sarcastic, who's speaking on behalf of the industry, who says, we're not going to have a tsunami here. Well, the answer is, you're right, we're not going to have a tsunami here, but that's totally irrelevant relative to Limerick. We could have a loss of power, which then could cause a loss of cooling water, which then could give us a meltdown. That can happen several ways, Nick. Earthquake. Now we know we've got a whole lot of earthquake faults within 17 miles. That's a possibility. Tornadoes. Anybody who's looked at the national weather scene in the last year would know that we get some severe weather. You can wind up with a tornado or a hurricane easily. We talked earlier in the program, design flaws, deterioration of materials, mechanical breakdowns happen all the time. They happen all the time at nuclear plants, including this one. The place is shut down frequently. They had a whole spate of shutdowns in a short period of time that were not adequately explained to the community. Human error. No matter how hard people try, they're not perfect. You can't be perfect if you're a human being. And terrorists. I mean, that's a very real threat. I mean, international terrorists have already announced their intent to do and inflict as much damage as possible. Nuclear plants were on their list of targets, and our response was, we probably don't need to do too much about that. So all of those things are possible, Nick.
And it's multiple things. It could be any one thing. It could be a combination of things depending on what took place at that time. So I think we're ready to take a break. All right, folks, we're going to take a short break. We'll be back, and when we come back, I'm going to invite Donna Cuthbert to be on the show, and we'll be back in just a moment. Hey everybody, welcome back to the ACE Report. It's Nick Lawrence, and I'm here with Dr. Lou Cuthbert, and now we're going to invite Donna Cuthbert into this, and they have some great information to share with you about how you can do some things to prepare for the possibility of something going wrong at Limerick. So, Donna, I want to turn it over to you. I know you have a lot of things to tell our audience about.
We've collected all this for emergency purposes ever since 9/11, when we realized that terrorists were trying to attack nuclear plants, and that Limerick is one of the most heavily populated nuclear plants in the United States. So we got concerned, and instead of getting panicked, we decided to get prepared, and that's what we are saying to everybody. We're doing workshops for people. Anyone with 10 people or more, we can come to you, or you can come here, and we go over a lot of things. You could ask us questions. Briefly, I'm going to explain a few things that we think are important to know. If there is a Limerick radiological emergency, a meltdown, or even a large release of radiation, it's a different kind of an emergency than others because you can't smell it, you can't see it. They likely won't tell you right away, but you need to be prepared. Now, one of the ways that we've decided to find out is the rat alert, where you can turn it on and it registers and you figure out what's normally being released around here. and then you'll know the comparison. Other than that, you need to wait for somebody to give you a clue. And that's the point. Don't wait until they tell you to evacuate. As long as you hear there might be a large problem or an accident or a release at Limerick, that's time to get thinking about leaving. But you need to have your things prepared ahead of time, because with a radiological emergency, being out in a long line of evacuation and not being able to get out of here is worse. So you first need to think about whether you want to shelter in place or whether you need to evacuate. For either thing, you need to be prepared so that you can take action as soon as possible. And that means gathering a lot of things, because with a radiological emergency, if you leave, you may not be able to ever come back again. And you need to have all the things that you'd want to cherish and take with you. The way we've started is that we have carts like this that you can stack and put a lot of these things in your carts. And they have rolling wheels on them, so they're easy to transport should you want to take them in your car or van or whatever you have. And in a closet, they're easier to store and stack that way. So that's number one. Number two, if there's a Limerick radiological emergency, you have no power or other things like that, you need to think about bathroom issues. And one of the things is the porta potty. And there are different kinds of things with the toilet paper and everything you would need for that. Also the food and being able to heat your food. So you need things like sterno, little stoves. And when we talk about food, there are ways you can buy food and store it, and even buy it when they have it on sale. There are different times where they have specials on these things. Some of these foods, for example, are foods that you can store like for 25 years, so that you're not having to get rid of it. When we first started storing things, we did it in cans. And then we found out that the cans went out of date, and you had to get rid of them. So that's not the best way to do it. But there are a lot of different ways you can buy foods to store, even in energy bars, that last for a long time, and you don't have to keep replacing them. They even make pet food that can be stored for a long time. So you put this away, you have it all stored up, and you mark the date that you get it so that you know when you started to store it. What we realized from emergency people that we talked to is that when there would be any kind of an emergency, the shelters that you would go to won't be ready. You'd have to have your own food and water, they say, for probably likely a week. So that's the first thing, to store water and food for a week for everybody in your family. Now, when you store water, that can be done a lot of different ways too. You can buy it in these little cartons that are like juice cartons that you would take, and they store a longer time than regular water. You can buy it in pouches. And for your home and for a larger way to have it, we buy these and we fill it with our own filtered water from home. And if you add a drop or two, for example, of lemon oil in it, that helps to keep the water purified. And you put the date that you filled the water bottle on top of it so that you change that periodically as well. The other thing that's important to have is the metal box where you might keep your passports and insurance papers, the deed to your home, the deed to your cars, things like that. That if you have it in the metal box, that it can't burn. If you need to grab it to evacuate, because when you leave, you want to make sure that you have everything. And I'd like, would you explain some more about the checkbooks? And
financial information can be very problematic if you don't plan ahead. Part of your emergency plan should be to ask yourself, if I can't come back to my home for a month or longer, what do I need? So the experts we talked to suggested that you want to be sure that you have your financial part of your plan, preferably in the metal box that Donna just showed you, to protect it. Things like your checkbooks, your mortgage statements, information on any other financial instruments that you may need to get access to. For those of you who are my vintage, you probably need to know, where your retirement account is, the number and the institution and that sort of thing. So if you can't come back to your home, you need to be sure that you have these kinds of documents, including deeds, if you have a deed to a property, titles to the car or cars that you've taken with you. If Donna said at the beginning of this session that you need to decide whether you're going to evacuate or shelter. You may need to make that decision pretty quickly because you may get some information that will tell you we need to load these cartons, we need to put these things into the car, and we need to drive away in order to be safe. So you don't want to be making those kinds of decisions at the last minute or second guessing yourself or getting 20 or 30 miles down the road and saying, oh gee, we forgot some things that we need.
And the way you tell is you keep radios, different kinds of radios on all the time to listen for the, once you know there may be a problem or an accident, to keep listening for routes that might be open. And that brings us to the point about the evacuation, choosing your route and telling your family where you are.
The experts have suggested that in addition to all of the materials, and Donna's going to go through some more of these supplies in a moment, you also need to have a plan in terms of destination and departure. So you need to have some idea what you're going to do in the event of a problem at this particular nuclear plant. The worst thing that you want to do is drive into a plume of radiation, so you want to get as much information as you can get, including looking at the directional flow of what's coming out of those towers. You don't want to drive toward that. Prevailing wind direction is normally to the southeast, but it could be in any direction. So you really need to take a look and then ask yourself, what is the safest direction for me to go? Normally it would be south or west or north or some variation in those directions. So you want to have a plan A and a plan B, just in case plan A is not available to you. Nick and I talked earlier in the program about what happens, on a normal day in 422. If there's a problem, forget 422, forget Route 100. They're not going to be viable.
And in a radiological emergency, you do not want to be sitting in traffic, which brings us back to sheltering in place. If you know you can't get en route and get away safely, then you start to think about sheltering in place. So what you do is you decide to choose a place in your home at the lowest level of your home and on an inside room so that there's as much distance between you and the radiation as possible. The time and the distance and the shielding. The shielding is what's most important if you're going to shelter in place in your home. And one thing to remember is that you actually need duct tape to tape your windows closed, because in a radiological emergency, plastic doesn't really work. So you go to the room you're going to be, and then you duct tape all the air intakes. In your home, first of all, you turn off all the air intakes, whether it's the air conditioner, the heater, the furnace, everything. Turn all the air intakes off. That should be the first thing you do. And one thing that people take chances, if you're going to put yourself in an airtight room, the worst thing you can do is light candles. Everybody thinks about, oh, well, I'll light candles, not power, whatever. It's much better to get a lantern like this, because the fumes from those candles can be toxic. And you don't want to be burning that in an airtight space where you're trying to wait until it's clear. Now, sheltering in place is only a temporary solution, because as soon as it's possibly clear, which you'll find out on what might be clear pathways, then it's time to take